All right, well, welcome everyone. We will go ahead and get started. And as you just heard, we are recording this webinar, and the recording will be available on the Committee on Professional Ethics website. And so I'm Donna Lalonde, and I'm at the American Statistical Association, and really delighted to welcome all of you to a really interesting discussion on ethical AI principles for statistical practitioners, experiences and challenges. And this is an opportunity to highlight a October released statement by the ASA Board of Directors that I know you will hear more about. I'm just going to share a couple of logistics. One is you are welcome to put questions in the Q&A, and as the moderators have time, they will address your questions. And also just to remind you again that the webinar is being recorded, so if you wish, you may ask the questions anonymously. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague Harold, who will be the MC for our gathering today.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Harold Gomez, and it's my pleasure to be here today. Before we start, just a disclaimer. Any opinions expressed in this webinar are those of the authors and do not constitute or reflect the opinions and policies of the organizations or industries they work for. They express their view as members of statistical community. First, it's my pleasure again, whether you're attending from East Coast, West Coast, North or South, we're glad that you are here today. Thank you very, very much for joining. Here are the presenters and moderators for today. We have Donna Lalonde, Andrew Gilman, Jana Eggers, Jing Chow, Mark Glickman. I'm Harold Gomez and Stephanie Ship. Just to give you a presentation outline for today, first, we'll have a brief overview of the AI guiding principles from the co-chairs, Jing and Mark, and then we'll go to our highlights for today, a conversation with Andrew and Jana. Then we'll have the question answer from the audience, and we'll close the session. An entire webinar should be 1 hour. First, we'll have a brief overview of the AI guiding principles and importance. And for this part, let me say a few words about the presenters. We have Jing and Mark, they're all co-chairs. So Dr. Jing Chow is a professor of statistics at Southern Methodist University. She chaired the ASA Committee on Professional Ethics from 2021 to 2024. During her term, she co-chaired work groups to produce the latest revision of the ASA Ethical Guidelines for Statistical Practice and the ASA Statement on Ethical AI Principles for Statistical Practitioners that we're having this webinar for. And Dr. Mark Glickman is a senior lecturer on statistics at Harvard University, an ASA fellow and a senior statistician at the Center for Healthcare Optimization and Implementation Research at Veterans Affairs. Among many accomplishments, Mark is the current chair of the ASA Committee on Data Science and Artificial Intelligence and previously served on the ASA board representing the Council of Sections Governing Board. Without any further ado, it's my pleasure to invite Jing, my colleague.
Okay, thank you, Harold. Thank you so much for everyone to attend this webinar. I would like to say a few things about this statement. Last fall, my Committee on Professional Ethics, and Mark's Committee on Data Science and AI, brainstormed this project because both of us, the committees, we think in AI statistics is one of the pillars. We shouldn't be left out of the conversation. So we proposed to Donna and the ASE board to spearhead this effort to put together this ASA statement. It's supposed to be a short statement, but we try to get the message out. And the message is ASA promotes the overarching goal of AI ethics as the promotes trustworthy AI through ethical guidelines. And in this short statement, we have a very succinct message, which has 3 guiding principles. The first principle is accountability. So you can read the accountability have several aspects to ensure auditability and governance, and also maintain professional competence and avoid blind reliance on AI. And then also define clear operational constraint to monitor the usage and deploy of AI. So the second is transparency. So we want to communicate AI tasks, benefits, and risk clearly, have clear documents, and also disclose biases and the limitations of AI systems. And the third is fairness. So that is mitigate biases and ensure equity. Also balance individual and collective interests to avoid exploitation. At the same time, we recognize in different communities, there are other principles such as explainability, privacy, safety, reliability, validity, a lot of T's. But we promote these three principles to just give the message out, and other practice can add their own fitted principles. Next slide, please, Harold. We also want to bring to your attention that ASA, we are proud to maintain ASA ethical guidelines of statistical practice. The last 5-year revision was approved by the ASB board in 2022. So altogether, we have this many guiding principles. In each principle, there are more detailed items. And if you look at this principle, ASA guideline, there are so many relevant guidelines that apply to AI ethics in statistical practice. And we want to promote these two documents together to create a conversation, to create a guideline principle that we can use to guide our practice. Also, in my last message, I want to call for some attention. Next year, 2022, we will have the next 5-year revision of ASA ethical guidelines. Though the current principles, the more or less relevant to AI practical statistical practice, but when we did it in 2021, we didn't experience this big interaction between statistics and AI yet. So we want to revise the next 5-year version more relevant. So if you want to participate, ASA will have dialogue, will have a web page. You can put your insight and the committee will make sure to incorporate that. So that will be all my message. I will turn this to my colleague, Mark.
Okay, thanks, Jing. Just to continue from what Jing was saying, this statement on ethical AI principles for statistical practitioners is this document that you can download from the ASA website. And we do think that there's good value in familiarizing yourself because from a statistician's point of view, there really are relevant guiding principles for statistical practitioners. And to mention 3 that are on this slide, statisticians can play the role of educating AI practitioners on methods and best practices that are relevant to trustworthy AI. Statisticians can also do other collaborators the favor of highlighting potential ethical pitfalls in the development of AI tools. And statisticians can play an important role in advocating ethical AI practices, in particular interdisciplinary teams, particularly among colleagues that are not very familiar with the kinds of problems that might come up in more of a statistical context. What I'm going to do in the next couple slides is give particular examples that are hopefully resonant to statisticians of these 3 main guiding principles that were in this ethical AI principle statement. So the first, as Jing mentioned, was this principle of accountability. So one possible example of demonstrating how accountability can be incorporated is imagine that there's a tech company that builds an algorithmic hiring platform. So they've basically automated the process of going through resumes and determining, at least on a first scan, who to consider bringing in for interview, say. And this kind of problem is notoriously susceptible to certain kinds of biases. And the role of a statistician might be to implement some algorithms to systematically identify potential gender or racial biases in this screening process. So the nature of accountability here is when biases are detected, then that creates a feedback loop, and the company can then fine-tune the algorithms to reduce that bias after identifying the source, and then ensure fair hiring practices. Next slide. For transparency, here's an example I want to share with you. Some of you have taken your life savings and invested it in portfolios that may be managed not just by financial advisors, but possibly by robo-advisors, which are algorithmic systems that essentially choose the investment products and rebalances your portfolio, and it does it in an automatic and algorithmic way. What is important in these kinds of systems, and the principle of transparency here is going to be evident when a particular a company ends up making it clear how their recommendations are being operationalized in the algorithms. So a good system is one that's not entirely black box, but ends up being essentially pieces of an algorithm that people can actually have some understanding of, especially with risk assessment aspects. And the final one I want to tell you about is fairness. So there are lots of algorithms that if you're not very careful, they can be very quickly unfair. So a classic example is in criminal justice, where AI risk assessment tools are actually used quite a bit to predict the likelihood of recidivism among prisoners. In fact, judges actually use these scores that come out of these algorithms to assess whether or not they're going to give harsher penalties to certain convicted criminals. And so, there's a long history, long being, 10 years or so, of these kinds of tools that have been shown to be unfair because they tend to incorporate racial biases because they explicitly incorporate race as part of the development of the tool. And so one thing a statistician can certainly help with is in the development of these tools, remove these kinds of sources of historical data in developing them, and that will definitely mitigate the bias. So those are just examples just to give you a sense for how a statistician can be involved in the process. I'm going to hand it over to Harold now.
Well, thank you very much, Mark and Jing, for giving us this brief overview. Now we have the highlight for today's webinar, a conversation with Andrew and Jana. And for this session, I would invite Stephanie to moderate. So Stephanie.
So welcome. I'm Stephanie Shipp, and I am the moderator for this conversation with Jana Eggers and Andrew Gelman. Jana Eggers is the CEO at Neurologics. This is a neuro-based artificial intelligence company that makes tools for other companies, AI tools. Jana is a mathematician and computer scientist who did not follow the family tradition in accounting, much to her parents' dismay. But she has extensive leadership experience, and as she calls it, bleeding edge technology expertise, having worked with several large companies, technology companies, and startups. So she describes herself as an AI practitioner. She translates both the business and the technology sides of AI. And when we invited Jana to join this panel or this webinar on the topic of ethical AI, she said that she hoped she could join because this topic is so important to her. So we are delighted that you are here today. Thank you. Andrew Gelman is a professor of statistics and political science at Columbia University. Andrew has a talent for explaining complex concepts to both the technical audience and the general public. Evidence of this are his numerous technical journal articles, as well as an equal number of articles in the New York Times and other popular press. His research covers a wide array of topics: campaign polls, redistricting, the probability that your vote will be decisive, the reversal of death sentences, and even radon in your basement. Andrew's explored the intersection of statistics and ethics, and he emphasizes the importance of integrity in the practice of communications of statistical analysis, and we'll learn more about that today. So thank you both for being here. And just to get started, Jana, we'll start with you. And we want to know, why is ethical AI, especially in the statistical and scientific world, important to you?
So thank you all, and thanks to the Mark and Jing before, because I love that you went over your principles before we were talking, and it really gave me more of a perspective too on where you all are in thinking about this. For me, honestly, it started as finding out the truth. I was at Los Alamos and, came as a mathematician, and there I was doing computational chemistry work, and I would produce something using statistical techniques at first, and then transition to AI. And with the statistical techniques, it was a bit easier to say, this is why. A bit. I'm not saying easy. I'm saying a bit easier. With AI, it was like, it's computing a lot more than we could before. And, because the machine said so, which really was not satisfactory, as you guys can understand, to the material scientists that I was working with, who were trying to then fabricate something based on what my calculations said. And their point was, there's a lot of sensitivity there. So I became that's not ethics, but it's where I got to my ethics, because it was really about how much do I need to prove to them that these numbers are right, that we're using the right data, that we're using the right algorithm? How do we show that? And that's where I got very passionate about what's the right thing with AI. It is a new tool, as you all have talked about. What I also love that Mark and Jean presented is, there's a lot of similarities with ethics and what you've done in the past. I think, Andrew, you said a little bit earlier, I'm a statistician, not necessarily an expert in AI. I'm an expert in AI, not a statistician. I think we have a lot of overlap. And especially when it comes in the field of AI. And I'll tell you a bit more specific now too, is my company works with the military. We definitely in tech have had some tension in working with the military, and what we should do and how we should support the military. And my feeling about it is centered on the ethics, which is we need people there, especially with AI, because it is a bit more opaque than our traditional methods. We need people there who are passionate about understanding the underlying data, the underlying algorithms. Those both are two different things and two different places where ethics can have an impact. And then also the objective, and that to me is really the trinity of AI, is the algorithm, the data, and the objective that you're driving to. All three of those can change, and they're all three areas that you need to be thinking about the ethics of. So I'll end there. I can talk a lot more, but I'm really interested in having it be a conversation.
Great. Thanks, Jana. That was great, giving us the background. And I think your experience at Los Alamos resonates with a lot of us. Andrew, what do we learn when we examine the intersection of AI, ethics, and statistics? And if you want to just focus on ethics and statistics, that's perfectly fine as well.
Well, I guess just to put everything in perspective, like none of the stuff, I mean, like of all the things we were talking about, I guess you mentioned the military. So like killer robots and AI designed pandemics, like that's worse than all these other things, right? So oh yeah, let's talk about algorithmic fairness or whatever, privacy. People love talking about that. That's nothing compared to killer robots and AI designed pandemics. There are connections though politically. So if people can break privacy, then they can, for example, find out who whistleblowers are and out them, and then it's harder to stop people from building killer robots and AI designed pandemics, because most people don't want that, but some people do, right? So I think there is a connection, although it's kind of indirect. Like these are scary tools that people can use. I'm somehow ultimately scared about how things can be used in a political or military sense, more than I'm scared that my students will cheat on their final exam, or that nobody will learn anything, or blah blah blah. Those are lesser. So we should put that into context. Now, I spend most of my life complaining about minor things, so I'm not like criticizing that we're having this discussion. It just, we should think of the big picture. Statistics, I think statisticians have a lot to say about this for a couple of reasons. I think ethics is ultimately a property of people and a property of organizational and social structures that can facilitate cooperation. So behaving unethically is a kind of uncooperative behavior. I feel that compared to some fields of academia and science, statistics seems like a fairly a cooperative field, not a competitive field. So in that sense, I think we have something to offer. It's a privilege to speak at an ASA event and at all. I'm very happy to be able to do that. So, I mean, one question is how to facilitate that cooperation. But I think statistics, because it's always in the service of something else, has that cooperative nature. Now, the other thing, it's funny about AI because I feel like you can just sometimes people are rooting for it and sometimes they're rooting against it, right? So somebody emailed me, someone I know, and he said, I want to, do you have something I can throw, like some benchmark problems I can throw at AI? So I said, sure, go to my active statistics book, and in the appendix, we have a bunch of exam questions, and they're multiple choice questions. There's the right answer for each of them. So he threw them at the thing, and then he sent it to me. And yeah, I'll be honest, I'm rooting against it, right? Like, so it's like, yeah, it failed, it screwed up. Well, it's not good. I don't know. Like what's scary to me is not so much that someone would use this to cheat on an exam. What's scary to me is that someone would look at these solutions and not only think they're correct, but think the reasoning is correct. I mean, the internet is full of people, credentialed people who mouth off about stuff they know nothing about very authoritatively and convince other people. Some of those are statisticians. Some of those are me, right? And while AI, of course, scans the internet and finds this stuff and kind of does this behavior too. So yeah, that's kind of scary. But it is just interesting to think that why am I rooting against it? It's a tool, right? So like when we write Stan and people can fit Bayesian models in Stan, that's supposed to relieve people of the burden of writing their own MC samplers so they can do something more useful with their life. Similarly, people don't have to calculate by hand because we have computers that can do that. I'm rooting for Stan. I'm rooting for computation to be better. When are we rooting, when are we rooting for one thing or another? I don't have an answer, but I just think we should reflect upon this. Like if you're rooting for it to work or rooting for it not to work, what does that mean? Because like no method works all the time. And the fundamental thing we do, I mean, the fundamental thing we do as statisticians is develop methods that will be used by other people. Statistics is the science of defaults. And so we're used to this idea. Here's a statistical test, let it loose in the world. Now you could say AI is less transparent, but to the typical user, an AI is about as transparent as an F test or whatever. So I think we have a lot of experience thinking about general tools that people will use because they do things that people can't otherwise do by themselves. That can go wrong.
That both of you, great insights, and it looks like Jana's smiling, either violently agreeing or maybe ready to disagree with what Andrew's saying. But now I sort of want to turn the tables on you guys and allow you each an opportunity to ask each other a question and see where that takes us. So Jana, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So, Andrew, thanks for that. I was smiling, and there are definitely places that I would say, well, what about this? And there are so many others that I would agree. So it was both, Stephanie. You're reading it correctly.
Right.
Andrew, as I look through your work, which, by the way, there was a bunch of it that I knew about already, which was fun. Stats that are out of nowhere was an article that was fairly recent. That was an article I had forwarded around quite a bit. So thank you for all of your work. One of the things that I noticed as I was more backing up and looking at all the work you had done is stories are really important to you. And I think that's one of the ways that we get people to relate to statistics is tell the story around it. And so I was curious, particularly vis-a-vis stories and statistics and AI, how do you think about the ethics in terms of the stories? Like, is it the story? Are you using, the answers and the stats to tell the story, or are you using the story to tell the statistics?
I don't know. I mean, I could talk a lot about story. I mean, the only thing I'll say about stories just is that I think often storytelling is presented as something that we do to other people. Like, we have a great idea, let's tell it as a story so thick-headed people can understand it. And my take on stories is kind of not the opposite, but in the opposite direction, that we understand things through stories. And the example I like to give to statisticians is, why do you use the method that you use? I don't think I use Bayesian methods because someone computed a posterior probability that Bayesian methods were better. And I don't think someone else used a hypothesis test because they rejected the hypothesis that the hypothesis test didn't work, whatever. Like, we're using stories. Math is stories too, really, because a story is a set of assumptions that are then carried to their logical conclusion. And what makes a story interesting is that you don't know the conclusion from the premise. Here's a very simple story. What's the 100th digit of pi? I don't know, but I could compute it, right? I'm winding it up. That's why novelists sometimes say the characters ran away from them. It's like they wrote the damn characters. How could the characters have a life of their own? It just means that they have to follow their internal logic. And so, like, so much of science is about, like, theoretical science is about deductive reasoning and saying, if this is true and this is true, then look what surprising thing must be true. And if something is surprising, then then we can reflect, why is it surprising? What were our expectations? So we should be aware of that. I don't see a particular, I mean, from of all the AI, I mean, the AI things, like the AI that invests your stock or whatever, like, it's a predictive model, and so it can give bad predictions sometimes. So I guess you want to see where it doesn't work. Whenever I work with students and we're writing a paper about a method, I always say that what we need to do is add that you can't stop by saying this method dominates, because nothing dominates. You have to find examples where the method doesn't work. And that's true rhetorically speaking. You're much more convincing if you can say, oh yeah, my method doesn't work in this example that you don't care about. That makes me sound very reasonable, even though I'm not reasonable at all. But yeah, just to understand it. So maybe one way, like, the people who are rooting for it and the people who are rooting against it, somehow they should be able to feel that they're on the same team, that people who want the AI to work should welcome cases where it doesn't work and understand where that boundary is.
That's great. Andrew, your turn to ask a question to Jana.
Okay. So Jana, I want to ask, like, how important are the details of the technology? Because this is something and when I say that, I'm including three things. I'm including the algorithms, which are amazing. I'm including also the computer technology, the hardware that allows, huge amounts of energy to be used on this. And then I'm also talking about the kind of social structures that have allowed all this to happen and will facilitate it happening elsewhere.
Yeah, I think extraordinarily important. And what's even more important is some of what you were alluding to, which is we need to critically think about these things. So we need to challenge it and say, just like what you said, when does it not work? Or when do we not need GPUs, as an example, right? That are more resource heavy in terms of what they require. And so the question is a really great one, and I sort of alluded to it earlier. I talked about the AI trinity being the data, the algorithm, and the objective, and you can trade those off. So I'll give you a quick example that's one of my favorites, which is some folks are working on killer hornets that would go and kill a beehive. And they were doing this via visual detection, like detecting the hornet early enough that they could then go and, get it killed before it went after the hive. And they had an expert come out. They were doing pretty well, recognizing them. They had an expert come out, and the expert was like, "Oh, that's really cool. That's very interesting. Why aren't you using sound rather than vision, basically?" And then they were like, "What?" And he said, "The sound of a murder hornet, these hornets is very distinctive, right?" And so my example there is because that was actually using the sound was a less intense process, computationally intense process, and it was actually better. And I think that's one of the things we often don't do is go to the experts and really understand. He was an expert in murder hornet, in those hornets, and not necessarily in the technology, as you said. And so what's important for people is to really figure out how they can overlap. And I often talk about there's an impedance mismatch between my business objective and my technology. The people with the technology are excited to use the technology that they have. So these were people that understood vision algorithms, but what really worked was something else, and they didn't know that until they talked to an expert. So when you say how important is it, it is what we need to solve the problem, but the tools that you have aren't always the ones that are the right ones to solve that problem, either efficiently, to your point, in terms of a resource perspective, or even in terms of how well I can solve the quality of that. And so I think people constantly need to be asking that question. Listen, if they couldn't get audio files and that data just wasn't available to train, then the point's moot, right? Even if it is better to listen to it than see it, great. But if I can't get that data, it doesn't matter. So you always have to be ready to trade that off. And as a statistician or an AI practitioner, I call myself a practitioner rather than a researcher because I actually use the AI tools. I'm not trying to develop new ones. I'm trying to use the ones we have. As an AI practitioner, we need to be ready to change and to ask the question, is data like that available? How would I get it? Who has the best data for that? And be ready to jump in with a new algorithm with new data or with a new objective. If I can't solve the objective that I had before, how do I still make the situation better?
It's just interesting. It's just so many things I know nothing about. It's just interesting to hear whatever you're going to say on that. So, thanks.
So, Jana, I think in one of your YouTubes or videos, you did talk about why you need AI and why AI needs you. So I think you really just answered that very nicely as well. I want to ask one last question, and then I think we'll go to the Q&A. Related to the AI ethical principles for statistical practitioners, can you share any examples that might tie to that, or just examples that continue to help us learn about AI ethics in the statistics and scientific world? Andrew, do you want to start?
I would just draw analogy to ethics of other things. So what's the ethics of using linear regression or logistic regression, which of course, these are special cases of AI. So like the same issues should arise. And like obviously issues that people brought up about non-representative data are issues. There's a moral hazard people talked about forever. I have this perspective that statistics lives on the beach, in the sense that they're on a phase transition between problems that are too hard for statistics and too easy. So if you have enough data, you can just look at the damn data and answer your question. And if it doesn't show up visually, it can't be very important. And if you don't have enough data, it doesn't matter what statistics you do. I mean, statistics is then a tool to manage uncertainty, which isn't nothing, but that's not the main use of statistics. I mean, I love that stuff, but that's not core statistics. So core statistics is in this in-between area where you have enough data that you can learn from the data, but not so many data that you don't need it. So this, having new tools can change where that threshold is. I think often people just don't realize. I was once at some meeting and someone was talking about big data. It was like an astronomer, and they said they have just, how many, exabytes of data per millisecond or whatever, and they're trying to estimate these two parameters describing the universe. And I said in political science, it's the opposite. We have about 2 data points and just like 10 to the 20 different questions we want to ask. So somewhere in between is where it comes up.
Right. Jana?
That's a great answer. Thank you, Andrew. I'll be using some of that as examples too, and crediting you. So the thing that I'd like to call out, there's so much. Again, I think that your statement is something that I'm going to refer other folks to. I thought it's contained enough that I think you can get people to read something that I think was about 2 pages. I think that's great. And I think it was laid out very well by talking about what we're trying to achieve and what impacts that. And then, what are those core goals of accountability, transparency, and fairness? I want to go a click down in accountability, because I think it's an easy word to say, but it's hard to understand what it means for me as as someone going into the practice. And you guys talk about not blind reliance, making sure it's operating within constraints. What does the ecosystem require? I think all of this is critical thinking. And it's really even challenging things that you're told. So you may be told that, that our objective is seeing the murder hornet that I was, but like question that and say, what is our real objective though? Is it really seeing it, or is it really being able to detect it as soon as possible so we can protect the hive, right? Like, so don't get distracted sometimes by some of those things that you're told, and make sure that you're understanding what the underlying problems are. And then, back to the question that Andrew asked me, is the technology a good fit there? And if you have something that's more transparent, if you can use a decision tree on it, and you get great performance out of that, and you're able to maintain it, that's one of the challenges, of course, with something like a decision tree, is the ability to maintain it. Use that. Don't go for an advanced technology just because the advanced technology is there, which again I think Andrew was talking about as well. Really question what's the right tool, and do I need all of this data? Is this data helpful? Have the ability to have that flexibility. And I think that if you kind of go back to what you have a document right there, use that as a guideline for your projects. Jump back into it and say, hey, have I checked the boxes that this talks about? Have I really questioned what the answers are that are coming out? Don't go blind reliance. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. Well, the machine has more data, more background, more understanding than I do, so it must be right. And I think we've all seen with like ChatGPT, it's actually not. It will hallucinate, but it will also get the context wrong. And so I do think that's that healthy being able to question without just saying, well, it's going to get it wrong, without, Andrew, I know you said you're rooting against it. It's like, I'm rooting for it, but that doesn't mean that I blindly trust it, right?
And I'm not saying I should root against it. It's more like I recognized that I was rooting against it, and it made me think, why am I doing this? Like, why am I rooting against this? Is this a political thing? Is it that I feel threatened, right? Like, Mark here is a chess master, and I assume that he was rooting for all the chess programs to get better and better. Like, it's like exciting. And like I'm really, if someone has a program that does Bayesian computation, which is what I do, I'm rooting for someone to write a new program that's much better than mine and put me out of business, because like I feel like we're all working together. But yeah, somehow I don't feel that way about the AI, which makes me wonder why I'm feeling that. And I don't necessarily trust that feeling. That's all I'm saying.
So what I love about what you're both saying is how important expert judgment is in all of this and knowledge and bringing experts to the table if you are not the expert as well. If you're the expert on the AI side, you need the experts on the objective or the subject matter side. And I think that's really important. Right as I was getting on this webinar today, you know how you get those news flashes flashed by your computer, which totally distract you. And it said, London taxi drivers outperform AI. And of course, then I couldn't find the article, but I'll look for it later. But I thought it was just interesting. Again, it's, you know, still humans. You still need that human element to it. And so I love that question that you ask, why AI needs you as well.
Well, I can tell you a story because years ago I went to London to go to a meeting at the Royal Statistical Society, and I went to the meeting and I was in the wrong place. This was before, you know, Google and all that. I went to the wrong place, and I flagged down a taxi and gave him the address. And the taxi driver pulled out his AZ to find out where the street was. And I said, "What about the knowledge? Don't you guys know?" I thought, and he said, "No, we don't really know all the streets. That's just something people say."
So they do, but they can still outperform AI on that.
Well,
Or
you
so
know.
this article says. So this has been a terrific conversation. I think we might be ready, unless you have any last words of wisdom, to turn this over to the audience Q&A. I have a few from our committee here that we want to ask, and then Harold and I will alternate on sort of picking the questions from the Q&A. I think you can all see them. So if there's also any that you particularly are interested in, feel free to jump in as well. But I want to start first with a question from Jing, who wants to know what is the most important aspect on AI ethics? And what can we do to make a difference in promoting AI ethics? So just sort of broadly, I guess, promoting this and having a broad understanding, perhaps with your discussion being an initial foray into that. Jana, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll jump in and say, you know, and this is my soapbox, so take it in that context. I am very passionate about explainable AI. It goes back to my days at Los Alamos, as I mentioned, when the material scientists would look at me and say, "But why?" And so there are explainable tools for AI. There's also a lot of explainable AI out there. So I think that we don't challenge it enough. We say, "Oh, but this is the state of the art tool," and we don't even go and understand what state of the art means. And does that apply to what we do? So to me, one of the most important parts in our accountability is really understanding that we can ask for explainability, which is part of transparency, and really push for that, rather than just saying, "Well, that's the tool and that's what we have." And then the second thing, which really overlaps with that, and I kind of mentioned it earlier too, is really understanding the benchmarks and how they got there. You know, we hear these things about you know, "Oh, it's performing at a fifth grade level." It's like, well, what does that mean? There's lots of fifth grade level out there, and people don't quite understand, and there's no agreement even on what AGI and, you know, artificial general intelligence is. There's no agreement on what consciousness is. I mean, we're on the neuroscience department at MIT, and there isn't agreement on these things. And so just taking it, when people say things like that, don't take that at face value and say, "But what are the qualities that you're trying to get at?" When you say a fifth grade level, what's important about a fifth grade level to you? When you say AGI, what are you trying to say is good or bad about that? I love, again, what Andrew started with when he said, you know what it's good at and know what it's not good at, and really draw that out more.
Andrew?
I got nothing on this one.
Okay, that's all right. I think Harold's going to ask the next question. Let me then jump in. So what Weston McManus asked on Andrew's question regarding whether technology is being rooted for, how do we get people to pause to understand whether or not it's good? There's an analogy used from the GK Chesterton with townspeople arguing whether a new technology, the lamppost, should be up in the town square. How do we actually incorporate these ideas into industry before jumping off an all statistical cliff? Policy, ? Social, ? Education, ?
Well, Chesterton, his example, his point was don't take that fence down until you understand why it was put up, right? So that's a classic argument for conservatism. This is a little different because people aren't talking about taking a fence down. They're talking about like putting something new. So it's a little different. I just feel like it's good for us to recognize where we're coming from. That's a start, but I don't know. I'm just babbling. Let me stop talking. Sorry.
I think it also emphasizes the human again aspect. Jana, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think, I would say that yes is an answer to all of what you said, education, social, policy. I think, yes, we need all of it. And I don't mean like everything we can do in every area, but there's pieces that each can play. And there's a lot of education out there, and good education that doesn't require someone to be, a computer scientist. I'd also add to that it's having these conversations that helps a lot. So this is a way of getting that education out there. And I think that, what happens is people get carried away with the hype. Particularly, I'm going to go to DeepSeek, which I think many of you heard of in the last few weeks, that, was much more efficient than the, Chat GPTs of the world. And that's true, although they use those to get there. So there's some questions there, but I think that we have had so much of an abundance, particularly in the US, that we haven't been quite as scrappy as we used to be at things. I remember back in the olden days when Google was building their hardware racks out of standard laptop components, and everybody in the industry, which by the way I was at one of the original search engines, would laugh and say, ha ha ha, we have so many more machines than they do. And no one knows the name of the search engine that I was at, and well, some of you may, but most of you don't. And everyone knows Google, right? And I think we've lost some of that, which is exactly what the team in China did to build this. And so some of it is, should we be putting all this money towards these things, or should it be going other places? And that's kind of social, but it's social economic questions that may also relate to policy too. So that's kind of how I don't think that there's an easy answer there, but there are definitely conversations that we need to have.
Definitely. So another question from Jack Baker: how do we balance the environmental impact of AI with the potential benefits of deploying AI in certain scenarios? AI is so popular and everyone wants to implement it, but how do we consciously guide people to realize the environmental impact in relation to the business / consumer / et cetera impact?
I'll jump in and say, I wish I knew the answer to that. I will tell you, our AI is very computationally not intensive. And so our requirements are really low. Our customers are always surprised with our answers that we give. We designed it on purpose a little in the old Google days, as I was we wanted to run on very, very standard low cost hardware on purpose, and we designed for that. And the reason I'm telling you that is not to promote us and pat ourselves on the back, though I am proud of it. And it's more to say I'm shocked at how often people don't care. And even though we promote that, it's not the reason why people buy our software. Again, I think some of that is because of the abundance that we have, and it's easy to spin up these things on all the cloud platforms. And so people haven't really, it's a very, in my opinion, short-term focus of, yeah, but I have it, I should use it because that's going to be the best. Because we've been taught that, or we've been told, I should say, not taught. We've been told that that's the direction and that's what it takes to build these things. Although, like I said, I think DeepSeek has shown people that that's not actually the case.
Andrew, any thoughts?
Yeah, it's not my area of expertise.
Okay. Here's another question from Justin Gross. I direct a data analytics master's program, data science practitioners, and my instructors and I are currently contemplating how to integrate AI tools into the curriculum. We know that everyone's using these tools anyway, so we want to do it in a thoughtful way, helping students integrate LLM assistance into their workflow. What do you think is the most important ethical consideration for us to emphasize pedagogically with future data analysts? Andrew, you teach, so
Yeah, I teach, I do. And yeah, I don't know. I think different people are going to do it differently. And my way of dealing with it is that I used to have homework be 40% of the grade and class participation be 20% of the grade, and I switched that. So now homework's 20% of the grade. So then there's less of a motivation to cheat. And when I'm in class, when people are on their phones, I walk around and ask them to put them away. And then all the exams are in class. So like, yeah, people use it. But other people other people use these tools more actively. Um, I there's just so many choices in how to teach. But yeah, I guess I say I don't really have a good answer to this one either.
well, I'll put a shameless plug in. We're going to have an invited panel on that at the Symposium on Statistical Data Science and Statistics Conference in April. So for those of you interested, be sure to attend that conference. Jana, any thoughts? I mean, how do you train your staff, or what does this issue come up? I mean, you are an AI company, so.
Only a bit. One, I'll say, Andrew, I thought that was a great answer. I love that you flipped it to class participation, because I think I'll use that as an example. So, um, and we have co-ops, and we do actually talk about this, like, how do you use it in class? What do you think? What can you teach us? How do we learn? I'd say we really focus on learning. So, two areas that I'd say, and again, this is kind of, how you do it. One of the challenges for me is that LLMs are the most popular thing right now. And it's like, that's just language, and so much of your brain, you have one important component of your brain that's really focused on language, but that's not actually even where decision-making is done. Your brain doesn't use language to make decisions. It uses language as input to decision, and it uses language as expressing your decision, but actually the decision isn't made in the language, which is fascinating. There's lots of research on this. Ed Federico is one of the leaders on that, if you want to look up some of that. Anyway, so this focus on LLM gives me anxiety because it's just one piece. So I'd say one thing that I'd say is challenge your students to use tools other than the LLMs. Don't just rely on one, start learning about more there. We do, in our company, you mentioned learning, we have two programs that we use for learning. One we call Chat, which is our AI chat, which happens every Friday. And someone picks a video of about 15 to 20 minutes, and we watch that, and then we discuss it. And it can be anything. Sometimes it's, heavy math focus, and sometimes it's social. We've listened to plenty on consciousness, like I said. And it's really great to have those classroom participation, as Andrew called out. We also have a paper club. So every few weeks, we have a paper that we read. That's really meant to be something that's new and on the edge of research. So that's just keeping us current in a field that's rapidly moving. So hopefully that helps or gives people ideas.
Those are great answers. And we are right on time. I'm going to flip this back to Harold and Jing. I know there are many, many questions in the Q&A, and we are going to gather them and keep them and use it as a basis for future discussions and future webinars as well. My personal thanks, Jana and Andrew, and I'm now going to turn this over to Harold. Or I should say Harold and Jing, right? Both of you.
Harold, you are muted.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. It was an awesome conversation, Jana and Andrew and Stephanie. You did an awesome job moderating. It just, we learned a lot, so much, and it was also a lot of things that we have time to reflect and figure it out. Jing, you go ahead and give the last remarks before we finish.
Yeah, thank you, Harold. I have the best part of the job, that is to thank everybody. Now, in addition to thank Jenna and Andrew, the two rock stars from different fields, spend the hour with us giving their insight on this very important topic, I would like to have a few more thanks to different parties. First, as I mentioned, this ASA statement was organized by two committees, ASA Committee on Professional Ethics and Committee on Data Science and AI. The two committees, we formed a work group that include me, Mark, Matthew, Rotali, Brian, Vegetabali, and Leda Key. So we almost meet every 2 weeks to put this together. The two committee members, they read and give us feedback. So through group effort, we have this 4-page ASA statement. It's a pleasant read, I guarantee. So if you're interested, I strongly recommend take a look and distribute it. And this is one of the early, statements, document put forward by ASA. We hope this can be a starter to generate more discussion, because in the Q&A, some people say, hey, do you have a formal kind of platform opportunity for us to ask questions and continue the discussion on this very important topic? This ASA statement and this webinar serve exactly the purpose. We hope more discussion will be continued, and we statisticians, we should play a very important role in this important conversation. And then last but not least, two organizers, Harold and Stephanie, they started last October. Guys, let me tell you, it's not very easy to find great speakers. So they too put together this program, organized this webinar, coordinate with Donna. And then, of course, our big thank goes to Donna. She is our best supporter. And without her, this will not happen. And you got the notice because she's there to help us. So I hope you enjoy this webinar, and I hope we will continue this discussion. If there's any new further events, we will let you know as soon as possible. In the same time, you can voice your opinion through your local chapters, through your committee, and then give us feedback. Last but not least, we will have our next 5-year revision of ASA, this document on ethical practice. We hope this discussion and important message can be effectively incorporated in the next round of revision. So that will be all for me. Harold?
Yes, thank you very much, Jing. And I wanted to thank you once again to the audience, and you made this time and you made this events where we could present to you. So thank you very, very much for joining. Donna, do you have any last minute remarks, or we can end at this point?
Well, you guys are good with timing. I think it's just about 3:59 and 30 seconds. I don't, but we will post the recording on the committee's website, and hopefully we can maybe develop an FAQ with some of the wonderful questions that were posed and add that to the resources as well.
Okay.
Okay, well,
Thank you.
thank you very, very much to everyone, to our rock stars and chairs and the audience. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
I see you all.